Welcome to the Life Stuff 101 podcast, dedicated to sharing stories and insights to inspire you to always make your mental and emotional wellness a top priority. We talk to people who share their personal journeys and experiences, as well as to people who share their professional expertise. And there'll also be other times when we share personal tips and stories, which will hopefully somehow spark that aha moment for you too. Because we all have those moments when we think, I wish I had known that earlier in life. That's what Life Stuff 101 is all about. Our discussion today is for general information purposes and not meant to be specific advice. For personalized support and specific answers to questions you may have, please consult the appropriate medical or mental health care professional. Now here's your host who's on this wild adventure ride of life just like you, and yes, a real life person who's actually slipped on a banana peel along the way. Mental wellness coach and psychotherapist Mio Yokoi.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Life Stuff 101. My name is Mio Yokoi and it's my goal to inspire you to make your mental and emotional wellness one of your top priorities. First and foremost, I want to just say that as I'm recording this, you may hear some construction sounds in the background, and that's because there is construction sounds in the background. I live in an area that actually has quite a bit of construction, has had construction for a number of years. This recent one is just pretty much right outside our balcony doors, and it's kind of unrelenting. And while development and growth and all that kind of stuff, I guess, is a good thing, I have to say that just having to have a background noise or just this background hum or a background pounding of construction all the time actually can be tiring, even if it isn't something that you're thinking about consciously. And I think that it's one of the things to keep in mind, especially if you're exhausted or there's a lot going on in your life, you have a lot on your plate, or if you are a person who has an experience or experiences or has a relationship with anxiety. And that is actually what we're talking about today. Today is actually a part one of my conversation with Nina K. Moore, where we talk about the experience of having anxiety about anxiety and the process of self-care in the face of anxiety, almost in real time. Nina and I actually talk about just things being triggered, things coming up for us, and self-care in relation to recording this podcast episode. Nina runs workshops about anxiety and recently held one called Okay Holiday, Bring It On, about creating a holiday survival plan for those who specifically deals with holiday-related anxiety. Nina's had experiences and her relationship with anxiety, which started around the time her daughter was born, I think about 7 years ago. And based on her experiences with anxiety, Nina is now an anxiety coach in Toronto who helps others to develop their own personalized action plan for anxiety reduction, prevention, and recovery. In part two of my conversation with Nina, which will be coming your way in a few weeks' time if you're listening to these episodes as they're released, or if you're listening anytime after January 2020, you're in my future, and you'll be able to listen to it anytime you wish. But first, please stick around and listen to this one. In the first part of this episode, Nina and I share our mutual experiences of anxiety about anxiety in relation to what it was for each of us to prepare for this episode. You may know that I have a thing about baseball, and the first 20 or so minutes of this episode is what I consider to be a little inside baseball, or even inside podcasting, or maybe even better yet, inside self-care, connecting, and acknowledging our mental wellness needs. We then get into talking about holiday-related anxiety, creating an individualized self-care plan, and more sharing around the experiences of anxiety. So if you want to get straight into the holiday-related anxiety discussion, I would suggest that you get to minute 24 or so. The exact timestamp will be noted in the show notes, but I do hope that you listen to the entire episode. But before we jump in, I want to be sure to mention that you can learn more about Nina at ninakmoore.com. That's Nina K, MOORE.com. And now here is my chat with Nina K. Moore. Nina, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I think today we're just actually going to start off a little differently than I have my other podcast episodes, and that this is our second time that we've actually set to record, Nina and I.
Yeah.
And we both thought that it would be just a good conversation to have about what we had mutually experienced and what's brought us here and what we'll be talking about today. But that said, anxiety is something that if it's an experience or a relationship that individuals or folks have, it can show up in different ways. And the way that I think about it, during the holidays, it can be heightened just because of all the stuff that's going on. Yeah, but before we get started, though, I think that it is important for us to talk about our own individual experiences.
So we were supposed to, it was on Saturday, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we were going to talk at first. It was that we were running out of time, I think. And jump in anytime. Should I get us started?
Yes, please do.
I think that you and I both had unexpectedly busy weeks. And so I had gotten the questions that you wanted to talk about on the podcast. And I thought I would have time to do it Friday. And then it turned out I didn't, but I had a backup window for Saturday before we talked. But then unexpectedly, I had a really bad night's sleep. And so my daughter moves a lot. And so I didn't even realize how much that was impacting me until I got home, and I got home to have this window to prep for the podcast. And I was like, no, I need to sleep before that can happen. And just with anxiety, like those self-care things are non-negotiables for me. So I would have, if I knew that I needed a sleep, like that's something I would have scheduled in, but it caught me off guard. And I was like, I have to take a nap. So then I took a power nap. And I buckled down, and then I think you sent me more questions.
Yes. So I'll jump in. From my end of things is that I did have quite a full week last week with work and different things going on. And I had a small window of time. What I like to actually do when I speak with folks on the podcast is to send some speaking points or some questions that would be good to cover. And what I didn't do was maybe give myself enough time to be able to think or talk through, because I was very clear, at least within myself, that I wanted to talk to Nina about both holiday-related stress and also just the work that she does and her experience, her personal experiences around anxiety. And firstly, I thought that maybe we can have this giant conversation where we cover it all. But then I thought, maybe that would just dilute the whole thing. So when I put the talking points together initially, I was really thinking more about sort of the breadth of experience and all the great things that Nina has, talks about on her website and the workshops that she does and so forth. And I ended up focusing more on that. But then once I sent her these details, I thought to myself, what could really be timely, because we're actually recording this in December of 2019, is to talk more specifically and maybe with more focus around holiday-related anxiety that can come up and how we can manage it or to understand it better and so forth. And what happened was that I sent this message off to Nina, and then even kind of like threw in at the very end, is like, maybe we can do 2 episodes around this, and then just sent it off, and then just went about the rest of my day, which is a pretty full day. And then by the time Saturday rolled around, which is when we were scheduled to record, I actually had also a horrible night's sleep.
Right.
And when and one of the things, actually, there's an episode that's coming up with someone that I spoke to who's a sleep specialist, because sleep is something that I am obsessed with. The idea of getting sleep and the idea of getting quality sleep and the impact that it has on us, all that kind of stuff. I'm obsessed with it. And I so notice it when I don't get the sleep that I need and the quality of sleep and the length of sleep that I need. And sometimes it's difficult to tell for me if I am tired or if it's triggered some level of anxiety or a little bit of both. Like it's something that happens where it's just everything feels off for me. And so I took most of Saturday just to get some rest, and I get to feeling like I was ready to have this conversation with Nina later on in the afternoon. But then I thought to myself, well, like maybe if I send her some questions around the holiday related anxiety stuff, that we could maybe focus on that. But at the back of my mind, I was thinking, it's like, this is a lot to maybe be kind of sending her at almost in the last minute. What happened, I think, was that we connected.
Yeah.
I sent the email. I'm curious to know how that was for you receiving it.
So I got it. And initially I was like, okay, I can do this. Like self-talk, like, okay. And then now living with anxiety, I know pretty quick when that denial piece will spiral and will not be productive. So I can name that pretty quick now. And I was thinking like, this is my passion too, talking about anxiety. And I could feel myself, I was reading your questions and I was like, yeah, I want to speak to that. I want to speak to that. I want to speak to that. But I couldn't access the information because my brain was starting to freeze, right? So like when many of us are triggered, we can't access names of people, or we can't digest what people are saying to us, let alone try and formulate an answer. And so I could feel my frustration setting in, and then I could feel myself catch it. And when I contacted you to have, can we have a quick chat? Like my body for me already relaxed because I knew I wasn't going to go there. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then it relaxed even more when you called me and you just made it so okay. You just listened. I said, you know what? I don't think I can do this. I can feel my system kind of seizing up, and I really want to do a good job. And this is something that I'm really passionate about. And can we reschedule? And then like I always like those conversations, I always have the visual of like two hands pressing against each other. And when one hand drops, the other hand just drops. And then you immediately spoke to your not sleeping well. And from there, it was just like, this is why we do this work, right?
One of the things that I really focused in on while we were having the conversation on Saturday as to whether we were trying to figure out another time to do it, either later that day or to reschedule it for today, which is this is Monday. The thing that I heard in you, and you said, I can power through it. And maybe it feels, or it, the context for you might be different. Yeah. But for me, what I know for myself is that I have perfectionist tendencies. I have tendencies toward being a high achiever, but I'm also an introvert, and I also have certain anxiety-related things, like based on traumas and the fact that I also identify as a highly sensitive person. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different things and what I understand about myself. And one of the things that you had said, that power through it, I know what it's like to power through things, mm-hmm. and the impact that it has, at least for me, because I'm able to do it. I'm able to kind of gather up all my resources, do it, but then afterwards, it's what, what happens afterwards for me. And this is, I think, what you're talking about in so many words, like this self-awareness piece, right? That you get to know yourself over time and through your experiences of, okay, like I know these bodily cues that I have, or even maybe the words that I use, that they're all cues or clues to understand. It's like, okay, like maybe there's a different way of looking at it or different ways to take care of myself in this moment.
I think that's exactly it. Like there are times where that situation would have come up and I would have just frankly said, I have to cancel this because it's not something that particularly speaks to something that I want to do. But this opportunity, for example, I'm so passionate about talking about it. I was like, no, this would be a power through situation for me. And I said that also with the knowledge of knowing, my daughter is at her dad's house that night. So I knew that I would have some recovery time, but like what you spoke to, it would require a recovery period. A lot of work that I had to do was figuring out, like I talk about when to surrender and when to push through. So there's times in life that we just have to push through. There's just circumstances when we just have to do it. But then there's also times when, deciding which tool is best. Like there's times where to push through and attend an event, I actually know will do me good because there's going to be really positive people there. And although I'm struggling to get out of the house, I know that once I get there, there's a good energy. I know that there are tools waiting for me. And then the other side of when to fully surrender. And, I kind of say, like, just let the storm wash over me and be in it and let it pass.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about anxiety, and I hope that in the conversation that we'll have, maybe when we speak specifically more about anxiety, and I'm sure we'll touch on it too when we're talking about holiday-related anxiety, is often feeling as though there's no choice. Anxiety can sometimes really get locked up because it feels like it's either this, like it's an either or kind of a feeling. It's sort of that survival mechanism. Yeah. But as soon as you get the sense, or as soon as you even entertain the idea that there's a choice or there's an option, that even if the anxiety doesn't completely go away, I've found, at least for myself, that there is at least an easing that happens. Yeah. And when you realize that it's like, oh no, that there's actually, I don't have to just put my head down and just follow through, or to power through as a term that we used. There is that sometimes like that helps, but like you say, not all situations in life allows for that. Mm-hmm. But it's understanding that there are more often than not more choices than we might think.
And I think that anxiety is at its most awful when it's blinding us from those options. So when day after day after day is a power through, right? That's when all the secondary health effects and the anxiety about the anxiety becomes its own beast.
Yes. And it becomes a norm to some degree.
Yeah. And I mean, we can speak to, what is considered normal out there too, right? Which is pretty wild, of what we have to grin and bear.
But the conversation that you and I did have a couple of days ago, just to talk that through, was so, I don't know what the word is. Like, I just was so grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for the fact that you reached out and let me know where you were at in that moment. And for the two of us to share what our mutual experiences have been that day. And it's also so fascinating to me. I reached out to Nina because I had seen that she was hosting and directing a workshop called OK Holidays, Bring It On. I had seen her ads around the area that I live in, and I thought, well, this is amazing that somebody is doing this. And I took a snapshot of the ad and I reached out to Nina, and she has been so open to having this conversation with me. So a couple days ago was the first time that we had actually connected, not an email, that we actually connected by voice. And the fact that, that first time that we connected, that we were able to have that conversation with one another, and that we were able to share our experiences and just to come to an understanding in the sense of exhale, I felt, at least for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it to be so incredibly valuable. So again, like thank you for reaching out that a couple days ago to let me know where you are, and thank you for being open to this experience and for us to even be talking about that in this way.
Yeah, because that's the piece, right? Like that conversation that we just had, letting that happen makes me know that anxiety is something that, sometimes I'm like, curse or blessing, because enduring what I did would not have brought me to a place to be able to have those conversations, because I need to have those conversations to be healthy.
It's so true. And most people, when they do experience, I think many folks, when they do experience anxiety or other mood-related issues or just even mental health and wellness difficulties, there's a tendency to withdraw as opposed to connect. And so it's so important, that connection, to reach out and to have a conversation and hopefully, right, to have the conversation with folks who are open and empathetic and understanding, because that doesn't always happen.
And it doesn't always happen. And for me, the big piece is that it was a very slow process for me to get to being able to get to a place where I could have those conversations with you. But that's what's kind of called me to this work, because I feel like there's a lot of missing pieces that I kind of had to discover on my own. And if they had been handed to me, it would have made, a number of years a lot less painful and anxiety ridden. Just kind of coming to a place where, anxiety, it's not about being cured or chasing a cure. It's about finding ways to manage it, and that those ways actually lead to a better life overall.
You learn the most around yourself in relation to anxiety, again, or other, difficulties that, or struggles that people may have. It's through the experience of it.
Yeah.
And you can read all about it. You could teach it. You could watch workshops on it and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's the experience, and also understanding what the experience means for you, and also in learning what tools or just things that are available to you that can help you manage or to understand yourself and how you might be feeling better or even differently.
Mio, and I just want to say how empowering it is for me to hear you as a psychotherapist, as the expert, own it and speak to your own experience. That is something that I felt was missing in my experience in large part. I felt like often I was the sick person and they were the healthy person, or they had once faced anxiety, but they had triumphed over it. Like, I feel like that's a very common narrative, the way mental health is presented. Like, yeah, me too once, right? And so I appreciate your dialogue about it's an ongoing process, and to live fully with it, or perhaps to live fully because of it.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be completely honest, it's something that I do have an internal struggle with in terms of what to share and how to share, only because it's not because of a personal thing. Like if it was just a personal decision, I would freely talk about all my stuff, but then there is also a part of me that's balancing sort of this professional aspect of things too. But I do speak very openly and freely about the fact that therapy is something that I have been doing for over 20 years. I continue to do, and it's part of my mental hygiene, and one of the ways that I talk about it, and that I'm not perfect. I haven't figured everything out. Like, the only thing that maybe I might have done is I certainly have training. I certainly have 10 years of this particular work as a psychotherapist, working with clients for 10 years now. But I also have just maybe a few steps ahead in terms of experience and training. It's not that I, all-knowing expert that's figured it all out, because I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the pieces though, right? The pieces. It's another piece. It's like the doctor that says, I became such a better doctor after being sick, or having a family member in a car accident, or it's that lived experience piece that just adds that richness.
Again, like I love the fact that we were able to have this conversation. And even as we were having the conversation on Saturday, we were saying like, this would actually be a really valuable thing to have as part of this recording.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we were actually able to get it into the recording. Again, like we'll just have maybe a more expanded version of this conversation or a continuation of this conversation when we speak specifically about more of a generalized conversation around anxiety in your work.
Yeah.
Because this is the time of year where many people do experience anxiety. And again, I really thought that it was really amazing that you had the workshop and proactively, right? Like back in November, late November is when you had your workshop, and I'm sorry you came across it after I think your workshop was already done. I had originally had a structure about how we were going to talk about it, but would you mind maybe if we just jump into talk about the workshop and how it came about?
Sure. I mean, the holiday season is just, the perfect storm for anxiety, right? And I mean, I think that that's what anxiety is in the first place. It's the coming together of many factors. During the holidays, there's things that we predictably face, right? More sugar, more alcohol, dread. You know that the cousin who triggers you is going to be at the dinner party, right? And pressure. So for me, a major tool in managing my anxiety is just making life choices that work for me, right? We spoke about that a bit. But during the holidays, it can be like we're six again. There's rules to follow just because that's the way they've always been, right? Or obligation. I think the other thing is that we're forced to face old trauma because Christmas, for example, happens every year. So, now we're faced with all those memories from the past. And also I think about really good memories that are in the past. I mean, that can bring up a lot of painful stuff. And so all these factors exist, and then all under the guise that we're supposed to be having a great time, right? It's supposed to be a really good time of year. Everybody's happy. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. And then I also think about Christmas is, they say it's about kids and it's about family and it's about couples. And I mean, that's salt in the wound. I know for the years when, my body and my heart were ready for children, but the circumstances weren't there. Those were painful Christmases, right? And then the big one is that in our culture, many of us want to make this season as long as possible. So, commercialism, which is a whole other conversation, but, someone who's dreading the holidays has to walk into a shop in early November and hear Christmas music. And we're not talking about a holiday. Like if we're talking about Christmas, for example, Christmas doesn't exist the 24th and the 25th, right? We're talking about 2 months of the year. And so, there were years where that was a really rough time for me. And now I seem to have enough tools to take the holiday season back. The workshops are just as much for me because to talk about this is a tool for me. Like it just the whole idea of struggling during the holidays is a bit of we don't talk about it, right? We're too busy being happy and partying. So for all those reasons, it's kind of the elephant in the room that I feel every year. So let's talk about it.
It's one thing though for you to have that awareness and that realization, but to take that step to say, this is something that's valuable. This is something that not only for yourself, but to be able to have, to educate and to have people or to provide the space for people, the space and time for people to consider that this is a time of year where you can be more intentional about taking care of yourself or taking care of anxiety that may come up around this year. So I'm curious to know, though, where that bridge was for you with the awareness of your own experiences of holidays and understanding that other people may have similar, even if it's in a different context.
Right.
what was it that had you say, okay, I'm actually going to do this?
Because when I, was in a ball on the floor, not being able to do things that I could always do, and being resourceful and being outspoken and having, many privileges and still not being able to access, I remember somebody just tell me what to do, right? There's still, we're talking about anxiety, but collectively, we don't yet understand what that means, what the day-to-day reality is for someone that really struggles with it. And so my piece was, this can't be for nothing, right? I'm a teacher. I get a lot of joy out of initiating conversations and letting people learn based on their own experiences. This is my avenue. And I also believe that often, like, coping with anxiety is often about, it's kind of being marketed about adding things, do this, try this. And when it's actually just about simplifying and taking things away, talking about it. So my work comes from, I would see my therapist and do wonderful healing, but what do I do until that next appointment? Have your tools in place for Christmas, for the holidays, but what does that mean beyond what we hear, like do yoga, breathe, go for a walk, see your family doctor? Like, okay, that's maybe 3 hours. I have 24 hours in the day, right? And so there was no one with a lived experience to say, hey, this is what I've come up with. Maybe this can serve you. And so and this is all, like, I can say this is all for me. This is all for my health, because there's something in my personality that needs to feel what I go through. I can have an impact on others. Like, this is actually very meta for me, right? Like, this is just talking about this. I'm going to bank some healthy days just having these conversations.
I'd imagine too, as a teacher, and having the years and experience as you do as a teacher, that you have that lived experience of the power of being able to impart and to teach. But we've only been speaking for a very short period of time. Like, my sense that I get from you is that the sharing and maybe the collaboration or knowing that it's possible for us to have a shared experience is maybe something, would you say, it has come from teaching?
Yeah. Or like chicken or the egg, right? Has it called me to teaching? But I know that, my happiest times in the classroom were when I was learning too, right? Like, I was changing as a person. And so even every time I talk with someone about anxiety, I learn something. And that in turn is empowering to me as someone that lives with anxiety, right? So even to hear somebody else say, yeah, when I have anxiety, I feel like I'm going crazy. And that is something that I never said out loud. Like, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was going insane. And so to hear somebody else say that, it was like I just felt my body go, oh, yeah, me too. And so that constantly happens, right? When you talk about it. And everybody has their own metaphor or analogy for it. I was speaking to another client and she spoke, it was like she had a lizard on her shoulder and that was her visual. And sometimes the lizard is just like trying to, like, talking in her ear and trying to distract her as she's focusing on something else. And her, anxiety is spiraling. So everybody, it's fascinating to see and recognize too that, anxiety is this wide continuum, but it's also something that works against us, because I can say I'm struggling with anxiety and I can get, oh yeah, me too. I remember this time and they're talking about like situational anxiety that maybe lasted 24 hours. And they don't understand that that is nothing compared to what I'm facing. And I felt like when I was in crisis, it was a lot of that dialogue that I could access, but not the I feel like I'm going crazy dialogue.
And that's another thing too around anxiety is that sometimes we use it, or it's used as a blanket statement. There is few conversations about the different kinds of anxieties that people experience and what that could look like for different people. And being able to have a group of people, or even in my case, I work one-on-one with folks, just to be able to go, oh, that's what your individual experience is. But there are other individual experiences that people are having. And when we're able to just speak it and acknowledge it, there is something about it that's like, oh, you're not alone in this experience, even though it may be a very unique experience to you. But I'd imagine that in a workshop setting or in a group setting where people are able to go, oh, okay, like that's not exactly how I experience it, or like what it feels like in my body exactly, but I get it. And as soon as that sense of like, oh, like I'm not alone, is such a powerful thing.
Yeah, and anxiety. How often do you get to hear like anxiety can be hell? It can be agony. It can be you want to die. I remember feeling like my clothes were on fire. Like it's rough, and that's not really out there yet.
So in terms of the workshop piece, can you take me through some of what you cover?
Sure.
Within the holiday related anxiety? Yeah.
So first, I like creating spaces where, you don't have to pretend like it's just anxiety is the baseline, right? Like you don't have to explain, you don't have to, give your go-to spiel about the difference of, anxiety versus stress, or it's just, in this case, everybody's there because the holidays trigger their anxiety and because they want to do something about it, right? So there's that mutual understanding that we're not just talking about feeling stressed or a little overwhelmed or, isn't this a bummer? We collectively know that it can be crippling, right? And then we kind of get down to some tangible tools, but on two levels. And this is kind of where what I kind of had to discover on my own was that the two levels are, on one level, what can we implement right away for this holiday season? Like we know it's coming up, here it is. And then what can we start to talk about like some long-term goals of what comes up, like what we want to change for holidays to come? Because it's fresh in us right now, right? In January, we put all those demons into the closet and then we don't want to think about it until we hear like jingle bells again in November. For example, I think of a client who was like, Nina, I'm working in the mall and it's not working, right? Like I'm exposing my body, my system to 2 months of Christmas songs, right? And so it was that after Christmas, she's going to do something about it for the following Christmas. She's at a point where she recognizes not an option this year. Like, for a while it was a default seasonal position and now it's just not an option anymore. So, okay, for next year, already there's this time next year, you won't be in this situation. But then quitting this year is not an option. Right. And we've talked about like when we have to push through and when we can't. Right. So for her, staying in the job, push through situation. And so then it became, okay, so let's think about what we can do to help you weather this storm. So then she talked about her partner that she lives with, talk about anxiety, just the stress of knowing that he's a big support for her and she won't have the energy and the ability to reciprocate that kindness, right? So she'll be over, the next 4 or 5 weeks, she'll be really leaning heavily on him. She makes it to work. She goes home. She goes to bed. She can stock up the freezer so that she can say, hey, there's something in dinner and he just has to, prepare it as opposed to cooking from scratch. And then we talked about she's going to, ahead of time, she's writing thank yous and compliments and things that she loves about him, so that, during those tough weeks, she can just pull it out of the jar and give it to him. Those are tips that can, because we have to support our supporters and, the people that support us. That's a whole other conversation. So it's kind of those short-term, immediate, okay, the storm is coming, what can we do? And then while it's fresh in our mind, thinking about the future. So we kind of look at it two-pronged when I'm working with someone.
And I think that's so important, that sometimes we can really just get focused on the now, like help me feel better now. And certainly that's a part of it, but to have an action plan and to being proactive, not just means me not feeling anxious right now, but also about understanding what may be contributing to the anxiety. Also, what in the future could be maybe something to avoid moving forward, but also to know what supports and what resources and what trusted folks that we have in our lives, and to also communicate, first of all, the gratitude, but also secondly, to have these conversations so that everyone's on the same page, as opposed to feeling, I know that some people can feel guilty.
Yes. Guilt is not good for anxiety.
That's that anxiety over anxiety thing, right?
Totally. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to point out too that, like, we keep talking about triggers, and some of the triggers I fully support. I think that a psychotherapist at different times is a good tool, right? Is part of the plan. And so that's not my work to do, right? To talk about, let's talk about this trigger, an old trigger. That would be work that somebody would do with you. Where I support is, if working in a mall is triggering for whatever reason, the reason for it would be work that they do with you, but is not working at that mall an option?
I feel like when you mention that, because people can get confused about different supports, maybe more professional supports that they could have access to. And as much as, even as a psychotherapist, part of my work is to observe and be a witness. I feel as though that's certainly a big part of the work that you do, it sounds like.
Yeah. Like I felt like I had no power in getting myself healthy, and that doesn't align with who I am. And so, like, I take action. That's my personality. And so to not be able to take action on something that was so intensely impacting my life was, talk about anxiety, right? I see that as my role. I see it. Let's notice the things about ourselves. How can I support you in coming up with this action plan that at some moments, like at my worst, was about, kind of examining, like, hour to hour how I was going to spend my time. I felt like that kind of umbrella action plan was something that I had to come up with from scratch, and that working with a psychotherapist was such an important part, but it left me with hours that I didn't, like, practical stuff.
Yeah, within therapy, there is an opportunity to be able to have an understanding of where the source of the anxieties may have come from, or why certain things are triggers, as you had mentioned, and so forth. But that's not always necessary. It can be very helpful to understand it. And it could be even like a fuller part of the picture.
Yeah.
But to just have support in understanding that it's possible to get through, and that there are tools that are available to be able to do so, and especially around, for instance, the holidays. And my sense, and this, you can tell me if I'm making an assumption here, is that you might have for yourself personally an action plan that's maybe more of a generalized action plan that you have in place for yourself. Do you also have a specific holiday action plan as well?
For me, my family and I have come to a place where the holidays are not a stressful time. Like, I come from a family we're very low key. We're not so stuck on traditions. And so what we do over the years have kind of changed as our lives have changed. we do gift giving, for example, we just do perishable food. So it's like fun shopping, and then we get to eat each other's gifts. But for me, the piece that my daughter goes away with my co-parent twice a year, and one of those times is Christmas. And in the beginning, that was a really hard thing. And so it was also, I kind of draw that parallel to the holiday season because it was associated with the holidays. And, now it's a great thing. And all along I knew that she's having a great time and she's in good hands. But I still know that during those dates that she's away, there's things that I have to have in place. And the times that I haven't done that work, they're a little tougher, right? It's, setting up social things for that period and having goals for that period and scheduling, good stuff and downtime. If I didn't do that work, I know that missing her might trigger old stuff.
It's very similarly to what you were talking about with your client, in that it's good to have an understanding and a plan based on the circumstances and the situation.
Yeah.
And that might change potentially from year to year.
Yeah.
So it's good to maybe have a time or some window before, like knowing that the holidays are coming, and to have a sense of what it is that you're going to need for yourself. But that it can change from year to year.
And that's how I see this whole, like for me, anxiety management is about staying on a positive trajectory, no matter how incremental. And it's also about noticing when it's no longer positive. How powerful would it be is if you in January be like, okay, how did those holidays feel? Was it any better? Was there any micro adjustments that I was able to make this year? That's a positive trajectory. And it there's no way I would ever speak to, here are your tips for an anxiety-free Christmas or an anxiety-free holiday season, right? Humanity, it just doesn't work that way.
For those people, though, that are listening right now and we're just smack dab in the middle of the holiday season at this point,
yeah.
The hope is that this recording is going to be evergreen so that people have an opportunity to listen to it at different times in the year, or maybe, in the holiday seasons in the future. What are some suggestions that you would have for people to think about putting a holiday action plan in place?
One of the big things for me is that my anxiety makes me forget the good stuff, and I can't access it when I'm in it. So when I'm anxious, I can't remember the names of movies that I love, and I can't remember books, that make me smile, and I can't remember. I'm sure that there are no people in my life that just make me relax. And I can't remember the comedians that make me laugh. And so, if you'd consider putting together those things when you're not in the depths of those hard times, right? So that what happens to me is if I'm in anxiety and I just need to let it wash over me and tune out and need relief, I might get to the computer to watch something, but then I'm spending copious amounts of time searching for something that will give me a little bit of relief. My experience, and this is a year-round thing, but that go-to list of even memories that make you smile, or people that you can call up and they'll just want to talk about the weather, and that's great, or movies that you can just surrender to when you need to. Anxiety tricks us like that, right? We forget. So that would be one tool.
And how do you keep track? Do you have a notebook? Do you have a document on?
Right now, yeah. It's fluid and it's ever changing. And making my kits are like the process, like even that process I like. So for example, like I love quotes. So I have a book of quotes, but sometimes to relax or get some relief, it's the copying down of the quotes from books, right? So it's been different things at different times. At one point I had what I call the healing drawer. And in there were like my Rubik's Cube and my Sudoku puzzles and my jigsaw puzzle and like my favorite pencil crayons and paper and a couple of books that I really like. Right now it's a box. It's just a box of goodness, of things that I like. There's some photographs in there. I'm always writing down things that my daughter says. And those are like laugh out loud stuff that I have. And I have a notebook. I always have a notebook on the go. So for me, an enormous tool is writing. But I also have folders on the computer of different things. So if an Excel spreadsheet is doing it for you, then that's your web of tools, right? I like to make things. So, it's tangible things for me. Like it's my knitting project is in that box. Sometimes I also have right now on my wall, I have a big poster of things that all my ideas that I'm trying to organize, whatever it is, like whatever speaks to you, right?
Mm. And I love that of knowing that it's for yourself as an individual, it could be fluid, that at one point in your life, it could be a drawer, but at another time it could be a box, and another time it could just be potentially just a notebook or an Excel spreadsheet. But sometimes I think what we can also lean into is this idea of this one thing, right? Or this one answer. And if something isn't working, then that could feel really disappointing for people. But to have that understanding is that individuals were fluid and that individuals are organic and that we're constantly changing, and that our tools and what we need for our plan might also be different based on where we are in the moment. And I really like that idea that what's right for you right now.
Right.
Is maybe what you lean into, and not to necessarily marry yourself to the idea that this is going to be the answer.
It's funny that you say that, because I think one of my tools is to go for a massage if my body clenches. And now I've gotten to the point where I can feel if that's happening, so I can go preemptively. But I went to one place and it was very healing and he would do incredible work, but there would be like, we would start to dialogue. And a couple of weeks ago, I needed something, but I just wanted to be anonymous on a table. Mm-hmm. So that space working with him, and I might one time, if I need to socialize at the same time, I will go back there. But right now I found a new place where nobody knows me and they're incredible, right? So just even that micro example that it doesn't mean that
that's really fantastic.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you've failed or that your anxiety is getting worse. Like just for me, that would be a bit of a spin, right? Now I understand that, circumstances change and needs change, and, you're kind of honing in on what you need. It gets more and more specific as you get better and better at this. So yeah, I can always go back, but now I have 2 massage places in my toolbox.
And I often talk about this, I feel in my work, but also personally as well, the idea of this moment. What is it that I need in this moment? Because like you just said, it's a micro example, but a good one, in that just, it's not just massage that's going to help. That although, massage in and of itself, and a good massage at that, that is going to be helpful. But to know that it's like, even if it's like, oh, I have someone that I like to go to, but they're a half an hour away.
Yes.
But maybe there's a place that's 10 minutes away or 5 minutes away that's walkable, that maybe isn't necessarily my first choice, but this is what I have access to today, or this is something that I'm able to do today, right? And so the either or way that sometimes people can think about self-care too is an important thing to dispel.
Yeah. And I think that also makes it like, for a while I was stuck on that, because I was like, I'm still figuring this out. I still have to find tools. When I was still in the headspace of when is this going to be over? It was almost like a failure that I worked my way through that, and just getting to a place that no, it's actually like how we don't always reread the same book, right?
Yeah. The flip side of that, what's actually really remarkable, and this is, what I often say is who we are as human beings, is that we're so adaptable that sometimes you can adapt to something so well that it might not necessarily be as effective as, something that might have been.
Right. Yes.
So it, on one hand,
that's totally it. Yes.
And, the way that I think about it sometimes is because I used to beat myself up where I was like, oh, this used to work for me. This used to help me, quote unquote, feel better. But now why isn't it working as well? Right. And I used to kind of turn that into myself as though there was something about me. But at the end of the day, it's to have that larger understanding of, there are so many variables and so many moving parts at any given time, but also we're just remarkably adaptive. And sometimes we just, know that there are different things that we're going to need. And that sometimes that discovery process in and of itself can be anxiety inducing, but it can also in some ways be interesting too, right? It could be like a self-discovery thing too.
That's so awesome. And it's also the piece, there might be a book that I've read cover to cover, and I'm like, this book does not speak to me anymore, done. And then I pick it up again ages later, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm going backwards.
Yeah.
Just we're getting something new out of it. So that's everything you do, everything you find, it's valuable. Keep it in that toolbox, right?
And also too, that's something that you might have kind of dropped off your radar for a little bit if you rediscover it again.
Yeah.
That could be pretty. That could be really pretty great too.
That's good stuff. And you just it can just be adapted to new circumstances, right? It might not look exactly how it did, but it can still be powerful. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I first of all just really love the conversation that we're having, and I'm really looking forward to actually continuing it. We touched on and talked about what can happen and how anxiety can be a part of the holidays for many folks. And do you have a resource, Nina, that maybe you can recommend for people if that's something that maybe they're struggling with?
Well, I said I write. It helps me, and I've written a collection of tools. Would it be okay if I give my email if people would like a copy of that? And if they wanted a copy of tools and tips for the holidays, they could get in touch with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Nina has a collection of resources that she's put together, and you can email her. She will send you this collection of resources. Where can people email you?
Nina K. Moore. So all lowercase, all together, at gmail.com. Or you can just visit my website, ninakmoore.com, and get in touch with me that way.
That's so great.
Thank you.
As we had spoken about previously, this has just been such a great conversation, and I would really like for us to reconnect and to talk more generally about your experiences and how you got into the work of supporting and working with clients and workshops around anxiety. I feel like today was a really good start to our discussion.
Yeah. I feel richer already.
I call this podcast Life Stuff 101 because every time I learn something about myself or about myself in relation to the world, to other people in life and so forth, I often think to myself, if I was able to have this lesson earlier in life, or even some of the stuff around, for instance, like mental health and wellness, if it was something that was more part of like school curriculum or something like that, I always think, this would have been really helpful to have known. In this case, rather than a life lesson, and I think this is something that, I'll speak to about when we reconnect again, but in terms of like a holiday survival lesson, would you have something specific in relation to that you can share?
So I'd say go slow, know that you are not alone. And if this holiday season is about nothing more than noticing. So if it's not the holiday season to start making changes, just start to notice You know, what does your body clench up about? What is the event that you're dreading? What are the places that don't feel good? Just start to gather information, get your intel, you know, see what's not working. And then there'll be time to sit with that and start planning for the holidays to come. It's a process.
Mm. Oh, I love it. And I think what can often happen, we started talking today around what happens around the holidays, that sometimes we can get so externalized. We think about what's happening all around us and what the expectations are. And there's also the sense of like what we believe the expectations are for ourselves, like to just be happy and festive and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But to start just taking note of what our individual, like what the internal experience is, rather than to maybe constantly be monitoring what's outside of us, but to start maybe taking note of the things that are going on, like you were saying, like physically, bodily, but also thought-wise and so forth. And I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, it's a lot. We're bombarded. So let's just baby step this.
Yeah, that's so great. Nina, thank you so much again. This is a really great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Nina, and please do reach out to Nina for her holiday anxiety resource at ninakmoore@gmail.com. That's Nina K MOORE @gmail.com, or by contacting her via her website at ninakmoore.com. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and Nina will be back in a future episode, as I'd mentioned earlier. And please subscribe if you haven't already, so that you'll be notified of future episodes as they are released. And if you'd like to see the more detailed show notes for each episode, or to learn more about me, please head on over to lifestuff101.com. In the meantime, I hope you have a lovely rest of the day or evening, wherever you are in the world. And I'll be talking to you again real soon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Life Stuff 101. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you'll be among the first to be notified when new episodes are released. Always be sure to check out lifestuff101.com for show notes and to be a member of Mio's Miracle Mob. Because as the wise modern-day philosopher John Bon Jovi once said, miracles happen every day. Change your perception of what a miracle is, and you'll see them all around you.